Hi, welcome to Weekend Review, where we look at some of the news in the headlines. Joined this week by Justin Wingirter from the Enterprise Desk, actually from the Watchdog Desk. Misidentified you there. My old friend Don McCoy, the business editor, and on the phone we have Jeff Patterson from the sports department. Hey Jeff, let's do something a little different today. Let's start with sports. Big night for the Thunder, the NBA draft. Who'd we land?
It was a late night for the Thunder. They didn't have any selections until number 53 and then also number 57 in the second round. And they took a couple wing players. First at number 53, they got a forward from Virginia named Devin Hall, who averaged 11.7 points per game last year. He's more of like a 3-and-D type of player who, in all likelihood, would end up on the G League affiliate for the Thunder next year, the Blue. 4 picks later, they took an interesting prospect from Texas Arlington named Kevin Hervey, not Harvey, Hervey. And he's a guy who's had a couple knee injuries, a couple ACL tears, but he really impressed at the scouting combine in Chicago. So he's a guy who could have potential. But the big news of the night for the Thunder came really late, and that ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, who's as connected as anybody in the NBA, reported the Thunder acquired Kentucky guard Hamidou Diallo, who had been drafted with the 45th pick, and because of how the trades work, that one can't be official for at least another week or two until early July. But he's a guy who, Coach John Calipari at Kentucky said earlier in the week, he has as much athleticism as anybody available in the draft. So he could be an interesting, contender to, maybe help out down the road for the Thunder.
Well, another big name, of course, for Oklahoma fans is Trae Young. Where did he end up, and what's the outlook for him in the NBA?
Well, he's walking into an interesting situation, one where he's going to have the spotlight on him. He was drafted with the number 5 pick by Dallas, who then shipped his draft rights to Atlanta. Now, Atlanta is a team that's had some success in recent history, but they're coming off a terrible season. And Trae Young goes in there as the unquestioned starter from day one, and he's a guy who can put fans in seats in a kind of a fickle sports market where Atlanta fans are they do have a reputation. So it's going to be an interesting fit for him. But if he ends up being Steph Curry instead of Seth Curry, Atlanta may have won the draft.
Well, let me turn to my other Thunder insider, Don McCoy. So this guy that this no-namer with, we were talking earlier, who can't shoot and doesn't pass.
Yeah. Hey, when you only have second-round picks, you got to take a chance. And the guy's apparently incredibly athletic. He played at Kentucky, and you don't even get to go to Kentucky unless you're really good. So if you can earn a scholarship at Kentucky, you might be able to play NBA ball, which is what the Thunder need. They need NBA-level players, and hopefully he will be one.
Jeff, does this get us any closer to an NBA championship?
Does this get the Thunder any closer?
Yes.
Not likely. I mean, they do get a first-round pick again next season, and they can't do any. I mean, they can't trade that away. And the reason they didn't have a first-round pick this year is all part of the Enes Kanter trade a few years back with the Utah Jazz. So you can't really get that's kind of the price of winning. Like if you have a good team, you're going to be picking late in the first round anyway. And then if you're trading those picks to get help like Enes Kanter, you're just not going to have that kind of help through the draft. So you really have to hope for the cheap salary guys from the second round to really be able to help you out. The Kari Johnsons of the world. So it's a lottery pick.
And free agency starts when, Jeff?
July 1st.
And we all have our fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, and it's still an eventful time for the Thunder. Carmelo Anthony will, in all likelihood, will not opt out of his contract because it's a $28 million deal. And are you going to walk away from $28 million?
Are you asking me personally? No.
Yeah.
No one's offering me $28 million, but if somebody wants to, I will not walk away.
Yeah. I mean, the other interesting news of the night was the Thunder had a contingent at a surprise birthday party for Paul George in California. And so who knows what Paul George will end up doing, but the Thunder, they've kept that line of communication open. And so, come July 1st, that's as early as something could officially happen. So maybe he stays, maybe he goes to the Lakers. We'll find out.
Yeah. Well, we've learned about keeping those lines of communication open and how that really helps with people like KD. So we'll see how that goes. Jeff, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Justin, let's talk about what's kind of been on everybody's radar this week, the situation at the border with the immigrant children trying to cross and being separated from their parents. Right. Talk a little bit about our delegation here and what they've had to say about the situation.
Well, first of all, this is a very odd situation in the sense that Congress usually does not take up contentious issues in an election year, especially by the summer, as we are in now. So for this issue to be thrust into election cycles, especially a really hot issue like immigration, is not what Republicans in Congress wanted. But they have to deal with it. They have been faced with this this crisis down at the southern border, and so they've had to deal with it. And Democrats have seized on this. Democrats running against Steve Russell here in the 5th District, which is most of Oklahoma County, along with Seminole and Pottawatomie counties. They have seized on this issue. They've had to suddenly answer for it, but have had pretty easy criticisms of the president. This has been a pretty popular issue for Democrats to take up all of a sudden. Republicans, on the other hand, have had to play defense and had to adjust very quickly to the situation. And so Congressman Steve Russell, who represents the 5th District here where we're sitting, gave a speech on the floor, the House floor, Wednesday night, which was a real denunciation of sort of this nativist, anti-immigration tone that some far-right people in his party have taken on. And Russell's someone who is conservative, in some ways more conservative than his district, but is a moderate on immigration. He has 3 children he adopted, who are now adults, but they're 3 children that he adopted from Hungary. He was in the military for a long time, so he saw much of the world and took sort of a cosmopolitan approach from things. And so he has a very moderate stance on immigration, despite being otherwise a pretty staunch conservative. So he gave a speech defending migrant workers on the floor, and really going after some members of his party, not by name, but claiming that the rhetoric he has heard from those on the right, the anti-immigration rhetoric, is really antithetical to American values, to American history. And it was a very strong speech, a very unusual speech from Russell, who is pretty much kind of a quiet backbencher in Congress. He's only been there a few years. So
now, there was a vote the other day that failed.
Right.
And am I wrong? Was he the only member of the Oklahoma delegation to vote against that measure?
That's correct. It only went to the House, so there was not a Senate vote. But in the House, of the 4 members, we have an open seat in Oklahoma in the Tulsa area, so there are only 4 members in the U.S. House, and Russell was the only one to vote against it. It was a pretty conservative bill. It would have limited legal immigration as well, things like the diversity lottery and family migration, the ability to bring family members in once you have migrated into the U.S. It would have limited some of that. And Russell, in his speech, was very defensive of family migration, something that on the right is often criticized as chain migration and is often demonized in his word. And he was a very staunch defender of this family migration. And just a very interesting speech, an unusual speech in a lot of ways, but a speech where he really laid down his perspective, which is contrary to a lot of what the Republican Party has stood for the last year or two.
Yeah, and as you've said, Steve Russell has pretty much been considered a very conservative
yeah.
person in a district that is tending a little bit more to the bluish side these days than from the red.
Or at least purple. They're kind of in the swing area.
Right.
Getting there.
And then another issue that we're going to be looking at probably in the coming weeks is, the discussion of there's still talk that facilities are going to be needed that there's still going to be children who are going to need facilities to be housed in, even though this executive order supposedly will be aimed at keeping families together, and whether Fort Sill will be employed as part of that. As far as we know to this point, the state has not been a destination for any of these families, correct?
As far as I know, but that question has to come up. Obviously, our proximity to Texas, lends itself to that. But Fort Sill has also been, it was a location, I forget the exact year, about 5 or 6 years ago, when the Obama administration took in many kids at the border and took them in and tried to give them refuge. They were temporarily held at Fort Sill along with some other places. So it is worth asking, and I just have not heard that yet, but it'll be something we're keeping an eye on, certainly.
Yeah, it's a big story. It's not going to be going away anytime soon. Don, let's talk about some development that's happening down by the new convention center, and this is sort of a big piece of it, or the hotel, I guess, essentially. Yeah. Talk a little bit about the project and the idea sort of to provide some affordable housing for the people who may end up working in that area.
Right. I mean, we're talking about where the new convention center is going to go in, and the Omni Convention Center Hotel, which is going to be a big hotel with a lot of facilities to handle convention traffic, and just to get people situated. This is directly south of Chesapeake Arena. It'll be alongside the new Scissortail Park, which is currently under construction. So next to the convention center and the hotel, there's going to be a big parking garage, obviously, and the idea was to wrap housing around this parking garage, which is how many of the big apartment complexes in downtown Oklahoma City work, that there's parking in the center of it in a parking garage. And so they wanted to carve out some of this housing, these apartments, for people who had limited incomes. And they had several projects, all of which were interesting to look at, and we're looking at the winner right now. That's called Boulevard Place. It's I believe like a 7-story, 8 stories, and it was the tallest of the projects that were put forward, and so that's the one that they selected. There's still some tweaking that could take place, but you're looking at for a pretty good percentage of these apartments, rents that are kind of unheard of in downtown Oklahoma City, particularly for new development. You can get into a 1-bedroom apartment here if you qualify for, I think it's between $500 and $600, which is.
And some of that discussion was around the fact that, look, we're going to have this new convention center, we're going to have this new area that's going to need employees to work there, and part of the idea was to try and build some living space that would actually accommodate people who will work in the area, right?
Exactly, and there's very little affordable housing. There's some, but not very much in downtown. And that's kind of the way things go. We're still really building, and there's a lot of momentum going on, and there's a lot of apartments being built. And typically, what gets built first is the stuff for people who have a lot of money, because they're better profit margins and they fill up quickly. So this is a new idea for Oklahoma City to have this brand new affordable housing. So it's really an interesting project, and it's also going to have a lot of retail around it. At the bottom, there's I think you saw in the video, there's a pool and a kind of a open area at the top, and so it's very nice.
I continue to be blown away by the changing landscape of downtown and how quickly it is changing.
Well, and it's going to be dramatic. Steve Lackmeyer wrote a column this week about we had a convention in town, 25,000 people, and we've seen them here. They're all over downtown, and he said you need to get used to this, because we're going to see more and more of this, particularly as the new convention center comes online. And the park, the convention center, the Omni Hotel, that's going to be a huge difference in the downtown that we're already getting used to a lot of changes. That's going to be a big transformation.
Streetcars being tested, seeing those out on the streets now and stuff. It really is amazing, all the change. And we chronicle that every day. The business desk does a great job of keeping up with development all around the city. The Watchdog desk does a great job of keeping up with the latest on political maneuverings and shakings in the state. We've got that and so much more, sports, just a ton of news. Pick us up, check us out. We'll see you next week.